Hello, and welcome to this pre-recorded feedback event for the retired examination for Unit 1, The Engineered World, version 5, June 2015. The lead examiner for Unit 1, The Engineered World, is Simon Clark. To help you get the most out of this feedback, you may want to have the following documents handy, as we will refer to them during the session. Here are the aims and objectives of today's session. You will receive feedback on performance of learners of the retired version 5 examination. Consider questions where significant numbers of learners underperformed and possible reasons why. Discuss the lead examiner's report. Consider delivery strategies and share good practice. Address common issues. Find out about further support available. Delegates should open the unit specification. Unit 1, The Engineered World. The unit overview provides the basis for the general content that the exam will cover. The unit overview is followed by the learning aims and unit content. Delegates should be aware that each learning aim is broken down into topics, and preceding the content for each topic is an outline of the knowledge that could be assessed for each topic in the external test. Format and purpose of the assessment. 1 hour on-screen, on-demand test worth 50 marks. The assessment consisted of a variety of question types, including multiple choice, objective questions, short answer questions, and an extended writing opportunity in the final question. Centres need to make sure that learners are fully prepared to sit the external assessment, entered for assessments at appropriate times, with due regard to resit opportunities as necessary. Sample assessment materials, along with a mark scheme, are available along with the first assessment and associated mark scheme and examiner's report. These should be used as practice material for learners and are available on the BTEC website. This is a GCSE equivalent Level 2 qualification and should be treated as such. It is not advisable for learners in Year 9 to sit the exam, as they may not have sufficient knowledge or experience of the subject. The next 10 slides will look at questions where learners did well. Question 1. This question is a straightforward multiple choice question. Learners need to identify their chosen response. Most learners achieved at least 1 mark here. A vehicle crankshaft is a typical product often associated with forging for question 1A, although some learners associated fuel production with the automotive rather than chemical sector in question 1B. Question 2. This is an example of a line matching question. Learners needed to match 2 engineered products to achieve 2 marks. Learners tended to do well on this question and were able to achieve both available marks. Question 3A. This question is an example of a short answer question. Where learners carefully read the question and noted the image and the use of grippers, full marks were often achieved, as exemplified in the response below. The first response is indicated in the mark scheme, while the second is a recognition of the pick and place function of this type of robot. Many learners referred to welding or car production, as these are common examples of the use of robots, reinforcing the need for centres to cover a range of applications and for learners to take their time in reading the question and interpreting the images linked to the question. Question 4. This question is in two parts, both being straightforward multiple-choice questions. The majority of learners did well on this question, being able to recognize a smartphone as being from the communications sector. Similarly, they recognized that a pocket calculator is from the electrical or electronic sector. Question 5. The majority of learners answered part of this question accurately. This is a straightforward multiple-choice question, requiring learners to identify two applications of piezoelectric transducers. This is from topic B1 in the specification and anticipates learners having knowledge of the applications of a variety of smart materials. Many learners were able to identify one application, however, the second seemed more challenging, suggesting they have a limited knowledge of how and where piezoelectric transducers are used. Question 9. This question is an example of a multiple-choice question. This question assessed knowledge of the powder metallurgy process. Learners were often able to identify one characteristic of the powder metallurgy process. However, identifying the second feature often proved challenging. As with previous examples, this type of multiple-choice question does tend to stretch learners, in that they are able to demonstrate limited knowledge but do not appear to have the breadth of knowledge required to access both marks. The correct responses were, high tolerances can be specified, and little waste material is produced. Question 11. This question is an example of a multiple-choice question. This question assessed knowledge of modern composite materials, with the vast majority of learners able to identify at least one of the correct missing words, and many able to select both. The correct responses were punctures and weight. Question 12. This question is an example of a multiple-choice question. This question assessed knowledge of lean manufacturing techniques. This question proved straightforward for those learners able to link the use of a go, no-go gauge with quality inspection and checking processes, and consequently a poke-yoke example. The correct response was poke-yoke. Question 13. This question is an example of a multiple-choice question. This question assessed knowledge of scales of production. This question was generally well answered, suggesting most learners can identify an example of continuous production. The correct response was continuous production. Question 15. This question is an example of a multiple-choice question. This question assessed knowledge of solar energy, a renewable energy source. This proved to be a relatively straightforward question, with learners able to recognize solar energy methods and identify them from the images provided. The correct responses were PV panels and water heater. Why learners did well. Learners tended to perform well on the earlier questions, specifically multiple-choice questions, as these seemed to be more straightforward, with those that contained images allowing the majority of marks to be accessed. Where learners provided written responses, those that applied their knowledge to the situation in the question were more likely to obtain substantial marks. Learners should be encouraged to consider the application given in the question and link this to the associated image if given. By applying their knowledge in this context, they will give themselves the best opportunity to access full marks in a question. Most areas could be improved by entering learners at a stage that is right for them. It is reiterated that entering Year 9 learners is unlikely to be appropriate, as they may not have sufficient knowledge or experience of the subject. The next 11 slides show examples of why learners accessed fewer marks on certain questions. Question 3b. This question is an example of a short answer question. This element required learners to identify a disadvantage of the use of robots for a specific application. This proved somewhat challenging for many. Often very generic answers such as expensive, slower, inefficient were seen, with no marks being awardable. Learners should be recognizing that robots are ideally suited to mass or continuous production, and constant reprogramming for small batches is a disadvantage. Question 6. This question is an example of a short answer question. This question assessed knowledge of a modern high-performance material, titanium. This question proved to be somewhat challenging for many learners. Where a question requires learners to explain, rather than state or identify, for example, 2 marks are available. Consequently, an explain question requires identification, followed by a linked extension to achieve both available marks. In this question, learners should be identifying the advantage of using the material, followed by why it is an advantage in this application. Often, learners might provide a very short response, such as identifying that titanium is non-corrosive, but not saying why this is an advantage in this situation. Question 7b. This question is an example of a short answer question. This aspect of the question related to the use of cutting fluid in the turning process. Learners often referred to a feature of the turning process, demonstrating an understanding of the process, but not why cutting fluid is used. Question 8. This question is an example of a short answer question. As previously noted, this type of question, explain, anticipates a linked response. Often, learners identified a feature of a welding mask or risks associated with the welding process, but did not link the two together appropriately. This led to many learners only achieving one of the 2 marks available. Question 10. This question is an example of a short answer question. This type of question, explain, anticipates 2 linked responses. The question assesses knowledge of superalloys from topic B1, Modern and Smart Materials in Engineering. Learners found this question challenging, with few demonstrating an understanding of the unique properties of superalloys and why they are ideally suited for use in jet engines. Many learner responses demonstrated an understanding of the alloying process or that jet engines operate at high temperatures. This knowledge by itself is not awardable, however, and only the most able learners were able to associate the features of a superalloy that make it an ideal material in the specific application. Question 14. This question is an example of a short answer question. This question proved challenging for many learners. The question specifically targets energy efficiency when linked to engineering processes. Few learners made the connection between energy efficiency and the engineering processes. This led to the majority of responses being generic environmental impact features, such as the use of fossil fuels or recycling. Learners should be encouraged to identify the application in each question to ensure they focus their responses appropriately. Question 16. This question is an example of a short answer question. This question assessed knowledge of computer numerically controlled (CNC) machinery, specifically in a measurement application. Many learners struggled with this question, with generic responses such as CNC is accurate or is fast, cheap, etc., without linking this to the process or alternatives. It is evident that learners are familiar with CNC. However, only the more able learners were able to address the use of CNC as a measuring technique, often linking the speed and consistency as an advantage over conventional measuring techniques where human error can occur. Question 17. This question is an example of a short answer question. This question assessed knowledge of welding. 2 explained advantages were required for this question. Where learners were awarded marks, they often only explained one advantage for 2 marks, or simply identified an advantage for 1 mark. Responses often suggested disadvantages related to cost, emissions consequently not being awardable. The question assesses knowledge of engineering processes from topic A2. Welding is specifically mentioned here, and learners should have an understanding of the full range of welding processes. Question 18. This question is an example of a short answer question. This question assessed knowledge of bionics. Most learners confused the use of bionic eyes with the use of cameras. They also often assumed a robot application. More able learners were able to link the way signals are sent to the brain, allowing other functions to be controlled. However, it is evident that this concept is challenging for the majority of learners. Question 19. It was pleasing to see that the majority of learners attempted this question and tried to provide an evaluative response. Many responses, however, focus on the photovoltaic PV panels mentioned in the question rather than the specifics of life cycle analysis, LCA. Many learners demonstrated knowledge of some of the stages of an LCA, mentioning a few key points such as energy waste, resource waste, parts reuse, recycling, etc. These were not applied directly to the company in the question, however, and often responses did not balance the arguments or provide a coherent conclusion. Consequently, many learners achieved between 1 and 3 marks for their recognition of basic or implicit considerations of an LCA. More able learners who considered all 5 stages of the LCA and were able to apply these to the production of PV panels, incorporating a conclusion, were able to access marks from the higher levels, as exemplified in the mark scheme. Pause to consider the mark scheme for this question. Moving on, you will now have an opportunity to attempt 3 of the questions from the June 2015 paper, version 5. Activity 1. Look at the example above. Pause the recording and look at the example. Using the mark scheme, decide what mark you think should be awarded and why. This is the learner's response to question 3A, with an explanation of how the marks were awarded. 1 mark awarded for the assembly response. 0 marks for painting of cars, as this type of robot has grippers rather than a paint spray end effector. This slide provides a summary of why some learners accessed fewer marks. Activity 2. This is the learner's response to question 10. Pause the recording and look at the example. Using the mark scheme, decide what mark you think should be awarded and why. This is the learner's response to question 10, with an explanation of how the marks were awarded. 4 marks awarded here. The first 2 marks for recognizing that the blades will not deform because the superalloy has good high-temperature strength properties. The second explained reason recognizes that superalloys have good corrosion resistance, so will not weather or break down over time. This slide summarises why some learners did well on this question. Activity 3. This is the learner's response to question 17. Pause the recording and look at the example. Using the mark scheme, decide what mark you think should be awarded and why. This is the learner's response to question 17, with an explanation of how the marks were awarded. 0 marks in total awarded here. Responses linked to cost cannot be rewarded without further explanation. Similarly, suggesting demand might change and stockpiling of materials are incorrect responses not related to TIG welding. The second disadvantage given suggests the weld may break without any justification for this. The subsequent extension related to lawsuits is therefore irrelevant here and an incorrect response. This slide summarises why some learners did well on this question. Delegates are now asked to pause to read the lead examiner's report. Please note that the majority of the questions on the paper have been commented on in the lead examiner's report. This is another resource for you to use to help understand the requirements of each question and to see what sort of responses were given by candidates and how they were awarded marks. Some of the information from it has been used in this presentation, and if you are able to spend some time reading it, I am sure it will help you gain further understanding. The report can be given to candidates so they can see for themselves what is required for the different types of questions and how they can be awarded marks. Common issues during this examination series were learners not making use of the scenario within answers. Centres could make more use of practice papers or write their own questions. Learners not reading the questions fully. Centres could make more use of practice papers or write their own questions. Many learners were evidently not ready for this assessment, often not attempting those questions requiring a typed or written response. This slide repeats the aims and objectives from the start of this presentation. Delegates should consider whether they feel these have been met. Guidance on where and how further support can be accessed is given in the following slides. Please note that this part of the presentation is dealing with the delivery of the qualification rather than the exam. 1. Practical-based learning sessions using role play, for example. 2. Mapping or integrating units across the centre. Although this can be an arduous task, it has proved to be beneficial in many centres. 3. Scenarios and contexts. Use these so learners get an idea of the different vocational scenarios. 4. Use of delivery guide. It is a useful document, but concentrate on each section of the specification. Use learner experience where possible and appropriate. 5. Group work. Learners can help each other understand topics. 6. Research. Look at the how and why rather than just using. 7. Projects. 8. Exam techniques. Use this presentation and the lead examiner's report to explain to learners the different exam techniques, especially where they might not be obvious when looking at a question such as explain. 1 mark for identification, 2nd mark for justification or expansion. 9. Enter learners when they are fully prepared so they will be able to achieve the best mark possible. This slide includes details of where further support is available. This is the key web page for customers to be aware of for support and guidance with BTEC results. For further guidance and support with the delivery and assessment of BTEC, see our full training offer here. Any further questions to be directed to the Subject Advisor for Engineering, Brian Reed. We constantly look to improve the delivery of our training and appreciate all delegate feedback. You will soon receive an email directing you to our online feedback form. The form takes no more than a couple of minutes to complete. Please let us know your thoughts by filling in this short form. All those who complete the online form will be able to enter themselves in the prize draw with a chance of winning a £100 Amazon.co.uk gift card. There will be one winner drawn every 3 months from those who enter during the preceding 3 months.